Eugene Mulero with Transport Topics, and joining us today is Mr. Jim Burnley. He's a partner at Venable LLP and a former transportation secretary between '87 and 1989. Mr. Burnley, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
There's a lot of talk about infrastructure on Capitol Hill and out of the White House, and there's a buzz about the expectation of having an infrastructure funding package. Yes. What should this package look like? What should, in your opinion, what should be some of the elements of this measure?
Well, there are going to be a number of elements because we're not in an era where simply getting more federal aid for highways and transit, which when we think about infrastructure in the transportation world, that's what we think of first, of course, where that's going to be possible. As I'm sure most of your viewers know, the Highway Trust Fund is way underwater. And in the last bill, the FAST Act, Congress had to prop it up as it had been doing for years with just direct transfers from Treasury because fuel taxes and other user taxes are way short of covering even current programs, much less ramping up spending. So we're looking, Eugene, at, I think, a package that'll call upon a variety of mechanisms. Given the political climate, it's not new, it's been this way for years. I do not expect any serious effort to raise federal fuel taxes or other taxes that go into the trust fund. So I think there'll be a fundamental choice again for Congress and the Trump administration to make about what they're going to do with the Highway Trust Fund. I think, you know, that's a crisis that's going to have to eventually be addressed. There'll be a point at which the Congress won't be willing to keep putting ever more money into it to prop it up. So that's going to have to be a part of the package, is how do you go forward with the Highway Trust Fund? There's a great deal of talk about public-private partnerships, and I think that's a very elastic term. It covers a lot of things, and different people put different things in that pot. But I think there will be an effort in corporate tax reform to encourage public-private partnerships of various kinds in infrastructure. And we have to remember, as I said a moment ago, we think about transportation, highways and transit infrastructure first and foremost, but I think this infrastructure package is going to cover more than just transportation. So we'll see that. A lot of the states are also experimenting, and also a lot of states have raised their fuel taxes in recent years. That'll certainly be a part of the discussion, is what the state's role should be going forward.
On Capitol Hill, especially I've seen it more on the Senate side, you've had some key transportation leaders be either dismissive or pushing back on the buzz and the talk of P3s coming from the administration. I would like you to react to that, especially when you hear Senator Barrasso of the EPA committee say that P3s, literally, he said, don't work for rural America. How do you react when you hear that sentiment from the Senate?
Well, I know what he's talking about. I mean, he's worried about a P3 where, in effect, you're using tolls, say, on a highway, and you don't have enough people using a lot of the highways in a state like his to be able to fund large expansions of the road system.
Wyoming.
And so as a result, his concerns are legitimate. But again, I think what we're going to see the Trump administration propose and Congress consider will be a combination of things. And because of concerns like Senator Barrasso is articulating, P3s will be a part of the mix, but they will by no means be the only vehicle.
We've heard from governors when they were in town a few weeks ago talk about the regulations on environmental policies related to construction projects, and the administration and the executive have talked about rolling back regulations. What would you either advise Secretary Chao, or how would you say that these rollbacks of regulations should be held?
Well, I think there will be a review of a lot of regulations, including environmental regulations. I think there's going to be a real focus on what we can do to make the whole environmental review process more efficient. I think there's universal bipartisan concern with a lot of the hurdles that have been created over the last 40 or 50 years in that process. So I do think there will be a very serious effort led by the White House, and with OMB being the White House's arm that actually helps implement it out among the cabinet agencies, to find ways to consolidate the process, to make it more efficient, to speed it up. The Obama administration and the last Congress did some work in this area. It's too soon to say how much impact it will have, but their work was, I think you could characterize it as incremental in its ambitions. I think the Trump administration will be much more ambitious in trying to clear away some of the obstacles and make it a lot faster process to get to the permitting stage.
You know, one thing that we, when I was on Capitol Hill speaking to some senators, was when reporters were pressing them as to why we haven't seen an infrastructure, the details of an infrastructure package, these Senate leaders were saying, well, you know, Secretary Chao just started, and you know, they still have to get the staff up and running at DOT. You know, for somebody who's been on the other side of this, could you talk about, you know, just give us some insight as to really what goes on and the time that it takes, and just paint a picture for us as to what you can envision the Secretary going through right now?
Well, I've actually spoken with her recently, and she's pretty clear about what she's going through. She's more or less home alone in terms of senior permanent political appointees. Her deputy secretary candidate was just announced by the White House last week.
Yeah.
No one else who is at the senior level that requires presidential appointments that are confirmed by the Senate has even been announced. So she has been in place since a few days after the inauguration in January with what is called a beachhead team of 25 to 30 folks who are there as temporary political appointees and who are trying to help her get control of DOT and move it in the direction she wants to lead it. But that's still very much a transitional process. And so she is understandably frustrated. Those of us who deal with the department share the frustration and concerns, and it's true, by the way, with every cabinet department. In fact, the U.S. Trade Representative hasn't yet had his hearing, which I think will be this week from what I've heard.
Yeah.
So that's another area where I'd like to think we could get a conversation going about how to clear some of the underbrush away and getting senior appointees through the process. Unfortunately, I fear there's not a lot of interest in that in the U.S. Senate. And from the time that I went through, I was actually in 3 different presidential appointments in the 1980s that required Senate confirmation. From that time till today, the hurdles you have to go over, the paperwork you have to fill out, the number of questions that the committee sends you in writing before and after you have a hearing, it's just been growing like weeds. And I think it does not serve the country well to have such an inefficient process. But it's ultimately in the hands of the U.S. Senate. They would have to be the ones to decide to change this.
And, you know, the Senate is going to be doing health care and then considering the Supreme Court nomination. So,
and the Congressional Review Act process, where they are looking at some regulations put out last year by the Obama administration and repealing them legislatively, that also takes Senate floor time.
Exactly.
So it's a time where it's just difficult to get people through the process. But I think the real hurdle comes at the committee level. I mean, it's driven by the overall atmosphere in the Senate, but it's the committees that drive this process of considering nominees. So I hope, for her sake, for the country's sake, that they'll be able to get out of the White House her other key senior appointees, the nominees for those jobs, very quickly. And then it'll be up to the committees of jurisdiction to get them through the confirmation process. We'll see how long it takes.
And we're going to be watching that closely. Mr. Secretary, I want you to touch on the budget, in that we got some guidance from Senator Susan Collins, the top appropriator for transportation, that the infrastructure Tiger grants will be something that she is expecting not to be funded in this budget proposal out of the White House. Do you have a view on the Tiger grants? Would the Tiger grants, did they do some good? Were they justified?
I have a mixed feeling about how they were administered. I'm always in favor of seeing additional resources made available for transportation infrastructure if they are used on projects that meet a cost-benefit analysis that's rigorously done. I'm afraid that in recent years, the Tiger grants have been politicized. There have been grants made out of that program that I don't think could possibly have survived a serious cost-benefit analysis.
Okay.
They were driven by political considerations. So I think the notion that the Tiger grant program may be substantially reduced or even eliminated in the president's budget proposal is probably pretty close to the mark. We'll see what happens. I expect that proposal to be out in the next couple of days. But it is a proposal. And because the grants were politicized, in some instances at least, that means they have political support in the Congress. And as a result, the president's proposal, whatever he proposes on Tiger grants, may not be what we see in the appropriations bills that come out of the appropriations process.
There was some already indication from senior lawmakers that they would back the Tiger grants. Secretary, I can't let you go without you chiming in on the American Society of Civil Engineers report card. The quadrennial grade came out and it was a D+. It didn't get any better, it didn't get any worse according to the engineers. Aside from the argument that this is a report card coming from a group of people who are interested in construction projects, yes, I want to get your reaction.
Well, you're right. I mean, it comes from a group that does have an interest in seeing more money spent on infrastructure, but I don't fault them for that, so do I. But I think the challenge is in going forward on the federal level in particular, again, speed up the process by clearing out the underbrush in the environmental review processes to the extent politically it can be done. And again, I think by regulation, it can be done to a substantial extent. Start applying rigorous cost-benefit analysis. Transportation, federal aid is constrained. It is more likely to become more constrained than it is likely to be less constrained. We're going to be in challenging times going forward. And again, we can't forget that the Highway Trust Fund basically has collapsed.
Yeah.
And so the politics of the Highway Trust Fund are difficult at best, and getting more money in, I think, will be increasingly difficult, as I said before. So we're in an environment where every dollar must be made to count when you're going to invest it in what you characterize as transportation infrastructure. It needs to be invested where it enhances our freight system, it enhances our ability to get to work, it enhances our ability to go on vacation. And we all know about projects that may not have been thought through to that extent, where the management of the contracts may not have been entirely the best. Again, this started in my era over my administration, President Reagan personally, and my personal objections, but the Big Dig Tunnel that many of your viewers will remember,
yeah, of course,
in Boston, the whole
yeah,
Central Artery project, is a perfect example of a project that probably needed to be done in some fashion, but which just spun out of control and ended up costing tens of billions more than was originally estimated. We can't let that go on any longer. And so I hope having a businessman as President of the United States, his approach to these projects, which he is very focused on, as we all know, will create an atmosphere in which those in his administration are really incentivized to make sure that how they administer these federal aid programs is designed to get the most bang for the buck.
Okay. Mr. Secretary, thank you for joining us. And
thank you.
Thank you. And check out ttnews.com on Tuesdays for Capital Agenda. Thanks.